Sentry, Knull, the two strongest characters in PvP in Marvel Future Fight as of this recording. I have the same build on them now with 20 Odin's Blessings and brilliant CTPs. And so what I wanted to do is put them through their paces with 9 identical builds and see how they perform. The only difference between these two characters right now is that Sentry has a plus 20 6-star artifact and Knull has a plus 20 3-star artifact. So forgive me for that one discrepancy. But to his advantage, which I cannot simulate taking off, Knull has the Symbiote Team-Up Collection. So this is not a purely 100% balanced test because of the Symbiote Team-Up Collection. That being said, I think it's very, very fair and pretty much as close as it gets. I've got a rank 241 Knull, and I've got a rank 138 Sentry, both with brilliant CTPs of Greed. So the way that we're going to do this is we're going to test in 4 different scenarios with 0 supports, which is essentially just a, donkey team of just that one character. Then we're going to test with 1 support, same across both characters. Then we're going to test 2 supports. Then we're going to test the 2 best supports for that character. And to do so, we're going to run them through batches of 3 fights each. And whoever performs better across those 3 fights will get 1 cumulative point. So at the end, the score will look something like 2-2 or 3-1 or 4-0 if one character vastly outperforms the other in all 12 fights. Let's dive in. So first up here, we've got Sentry lead with no supports against the #1 Vibranium player right now, which as of now has this team here with Silver Surfer and Knull and Agent Venom. Keep in mind that because their leaderships are not exactly the same, you may have a discrepancy in this situation, but hey, Sentry gets the first kill here, and then he does get Knull down to 50%. So again, that does matter. We're going to keep track of this as we move along to the next fight. Simulating it again, we can see that he has no problem taking down Silver Surfer in the first half, but he does die to Reflect in the second half. This may just be an unfortunate lining up of the Greed proc where it just doesn't activate in time, or that he just doesn't have enough tankiness to recover in between Silver Surfer and Knull. Queuing up the last test here, it seems like if he doesn't get the kill initially on, well, if he doesn't survive the revive on Silver Surfer here, he's probably doomed to die to Knull somewhere in the first half of Knull's HP. Thankfully, though, he hasn't ever died to Silver Surfer, so he always gets the kill on Surfer, but then he either dies immediately or he gets Knull down to about 50% and then dies there without triggering Knull's artifact. On the other hand, let's see how Knull performs here with essentially the same team. Now, this particular test may put Knull ahead in some circumstances because, wow, he still takes a ton of Reflect damage. It's so interesting how he basically performs the same way as Sentry against Surfer. He does, however, trigger Knull's artifact. Doesn't get the kill, but does trigger his artifact and almost kills Knull. Despite Sentry having the debuff Cleanse, which is probably a better leadership in some situations, Knull having this self-buffing lead does give him a bit more, potential for burst damage. But it's just so interesting to see how they essentially perform identically against Silver Surfer, where they can kill him the first time, but then they're going to die, or at least take death amounts of damage, right? Enough damage to kill them or trigger their artifact when Silver Surfer revives. Last fight here, Knull has basically performed better across all tests thus far versus Sentry, in the sense that although he does essentially that time he didn't. This is why you have to do 3 fights per. So he's actually going to trigger, they're both going to trigger each other's artifacts almost at the same time. But that does give my Knull, nope, never mind. But yeah, that is still, despite them both dying and not getting to Agent Venom, which they probably both would have killed, it seems that Knull outperforms Sentry by just a little bit versus this top team here, the #1 Vibranium player. It's not a huge outperformance, but Sentry was never able to trigger Knull's artifact on the second kill, whereas Knull always triggered Knull always triggered Knull's artifact, the enemy Knull's artifact, before dying shortly after. Now we're going to test with just one support. We're going to add in Colossus for damage reduction and see what happens. So just for fun, we're going to test out against a different team rather than always the exact same parameters. So this is, I believe, the rank 5 Vibranium player, Terry. And we're going to see how Sentry performs with one support. So he does get killed initially. Okay, he actually gets killed twice, and he essentially never deals any damage to Knull. On the second attempt here, let's see if Sentry can perform a little bit better. He does take a ton of damage in the intro and actually just dies to the second skill. You know, no diddy. But he is able to get off some damage, but he just immediately gets one shot right after. So there's just no sustain on Sentry's kit to allow him to really snowball. It feels like he starts to get a bit of a ramp after dying initially, and then he just quickly gets interrupted and gets clapped kind of out of existence. And it's that initial barrage there that he isn't able to tank at all, which is hugely problematic because it means that he puts him at such a huge disadvantage for the following, rotation. In the case of Knull, let's see how he performs against himself. So his artifact is immediately triggered. He doesn't actually get off enough damage to trigger the enemy Knull's artifact. Keep that in mind. But he was able to do more damage than Sentry, and he finally succumbs. So not much better performance, but clearly slightly better performance, mostly because instead of dying and reviving, he's staying in the fight when his artifact is triggered, allowing him to counter more quickly and not allowing Knull to reset. But in this one, I would honestly almost call this a tie and give each of them a point or give neither of them a point, because the difference in damage that Knull is dealing to Sentry here is almost not worth mentioning. Like, they're dealing so little damage to the enemy Knull that it's hilarious. You know, like it's a quarter of his HP at best, and then they get wiped. Moving on to double support, we're actually going to use Shuri here. So we use one defensive support and one offensive support to see if this allows their performance to improve, or if one takes a drastic lead over the other. For this test, we're going to go against, I believe, the rank 10 or 12 Vibranium player here, in this case using Agent Venom, Knull, and Sentry. So we're going to see if this additional support of Shuri allows them to perform better. And as you can see here, Sentry was able to trigger Knull's artifact. Will he have enough damage now to kill Knull? There he does. He does kill him. And now, does he have enough sustain to take down the enemy Sentry? And it looks like he does. Awesome. Can he kill him one more time is the next question. We'll have to wait and see. Someone's greed is about to get triggered, I believe. Or maybe he has a conquest, in which case I have a huge advantage. It seems like he does have a conquest. So this is probably over. And so keep track of the time here. Sentry is able to get the sweep in under 45 seconds, in 43 seconds. Queuing up again against 0000, that's the name of the player, just so that we're clear on the showcase. That, I mean, you can always match up the HPs if you don't believe I'm fighting against the same teams, but I'm not into any funny business here. Let's see what happens here in the second run through, if that was just a fluke for Sentry or if he's committed to decimating this team. He does get the early trigger on Knull's artifact, which is great. The inclusion of Shuri here is really helping him against enemy Knulls to sustain. And then he just has such a juicy build that versus enemy sentries, if they're not able to take him down quickly, they're just going to get punished by that brilliant greed proc that just shreds their defenses. So especially if they're using a conquest, which I suspect this one is. Yeah, he's using a conquest. So essentially with the conquest here, and with no offensive supports, the enemy sentry doesn't have enough damage to chew through my sentry with Colossus, because Shuri's not providing any buffs against heroes, right? And so essentially it's just until my greed procs, then it's over. That one took a little bit longer, but that was still under a minute. That was 57 seconds. So 43, 57, and whatever this one ends up being, and then we'll average it out to see the average time that it takes Sentry to kill this team. And please note that I believe in this testing, Sentry also never died. Okay, that's the first time he died. So in the first two fights, he never lost a life, which again is important because we may need these small differences in performance to ultimately give a point. He's actually going to die twice here. So he doesn't get the clean sweep. He doesn't get the clean sweep. he ends up taking on average 50 seconds to get the kill, but only gets the kill 2 out of 3 times. Swapping over to the Knull team now, this should be interesting to see how he performs, if he performs as good, better, or somewhere in between. He takes a lot of damage from Knull, but he is able to sustain. He does get his artifact triggered, so this would be the equivalent of Sentry dying. He seems to be... Wow, he dies. So he just died. He wasn't able to recover. He did trigger Knull's artifact, but he actually starts off with a much worse performance here, dying on the first attempt. Wow. Interesting. He's going to have... He has a big hill to climb up here now. He has to sweep the next 2, and he has to do it fast, because otherwise Sentry is going to win this next point. Although Knull won the first point, I would say the second point is basically a tie, which means that if Sentry comes away the winner, if Knull dies here without getting the sweep, we're all tied up at 2 games apiece, or you know, yeah, 1 game apiece with 1 tie. Okay, he does get the kill, but it's a little bit shaky, I'll be honest. It wasn't the cleanest kill I've ever seen. He is taking a lot of damage from Sentry. He's very low. He dies. It's over. Wow. So Knull actually gets outperformed by Sentry in this test. Wow. We'll do the 3rd run just for posterity, but Knull is performing so much worse than Sentry right now. It's crazy. I don't know if Knull is going to get a single sweep. Sentry got 2 sweeps and almost got 3 sweeps, whereas Knull is struggling to even get a single sweep. And it's interesting because in particular, Knull is struggling here versus Knull. He's actually struggling more than Sentry was struggling versus his you know, mirror match. I'm gonna die again. Okay, he gets the kill. That was a little bit more convincing, I guess. Let's see what happens here. We get the kill on Sentry. Nice. We still need 1 more, but it should be in the bag with a tier 4 now. Or not. Oh, I'm dead. Oh, recovery. But he's struggling against Sentry. He's struggling. Okay, he gets the kill there. So he gets 1 kill out of 3 with an average time of 45 seconds. But yeah, we still have to give that point to Sentry. So after 3 out of 4 rounds, we're actually completely tied. And so this is actually really interesting. I think what this probably illustrates is that when you don't have Agent Venom, Sentry may appear to be as strong or stronger than Knull. We can go ahead and do the final test here with their quote-unquote best supports, but ultimately I believe that everyone knows once you give Agent Venom over to Knull, he kind of has it in the bag, just because Agent Venom has so many insane buffs for allies. And in this case, my build here, having a Liberation, just gives gives Knull so many buffs that Sentry otherwise doesn't have access to. Now, in Sentry's case, what I can do to try and simulate Agent Venom, quote-unquote, as best as I can, is to go with Molecule Man. Molecule Man, in this case, has a brilliant Liberation, which is actually even better, and he also has access to these other buffs that he gives to allies. So we can stack some chain hit damage reduction, which, as you know, is also part of Agent Venom's buffs. So this would probably be, with swapping out Shuri for someone else, this would be the best, or sort of like the closest kind of proximity build would probably be something like this, or swap out Victorious for Morgan Le Fay. For the final test here, we're going to go up against Commander. We're going to use Commander's Challenger team here for a friendly match. Because it's a friendly match, I believe the Challenger buffs don't apply, and we're going to see how Sentry performs with what I would say is the closest proximity to Agent Venom's buffs for Knull. Okay, yeah, he gets obliterated in the first one there, but he's going to come back. Now, the reason why I went with Victorious over Morgan Le Fay, although we do lose here anyways, is because Victorious is providing 40% HP from her passive, as well as her artifact providing another, I believe, 13% attack and 9% ignore dodge. Morgan Le Fay, on the other hand, is going to provide debuff cleanse, which Sentry doesn't need, increased damage to bosses, which Sentry can't use in PvP, and then ultimately only 35% attack. So I sort of weighed the pros and cons, and I figured that 40% HP and 13% attack was better than 30% attack, but some people may disagree with me and think that one was better than the other. Here, regardless though, Sentry is not performing, very well. He's not even able to get through Knull with just Agent Venom support, not stacking double support. And I believe some of Agent Venom's, but I can't remember if Agent Venom has a hero-villain buff. But if he does, Molecule Man is ignoring it because that's part of his leadership, to ignore increases and decreases to heroes and villains. That being said, if Sentry has one of those buffs, he's also losing it. So, oh, wow, Knull's too tanky. So that was the only performance worth noting where we almost triggered Knull's artifact. Almost. I know I said Knull's artifact. I mean Knull's passive. You know what I mean. Now, this is going to be a Knull mirror match, with the only difference being my Knull having access to Colossus. So this one is probably going to, my guess is that it's better. Yeah, so first match here, immediately trigger his artifact and actually able to tank him is a pretty big kind of serious difference here. Again, there's no real way to simulate the value of Agent Venom completely on anyone else because the buffs just don't apply. So I'm sort of doing my best here. Some people would say maybe, go with Colossus and another support character for Sentry, but we already tested that with Shuri, so, and you don't get the liberation in that case. And if you give Agent Venom to Sentry, then it's just the liberation and nothing else. So I think Molecule Man is as close as we're going to get. But as you can see here, and this is kind of what I expected from the testing, once you're able to give Knull Agent Venom and you're able to give Agent Venom his artifact, you will see a massive jump where Knull suddenly becomes far and away the winner versus Sentry. So I think this is a really interesting end of the results. I actually expected Knull to just outperform Sentry across all tests. And I was really surprised that when you strip them down, Sentry's actually so much closer than people, I think, realize. And I realized, because I didn't think that's how the results were going to go. And remember, all of this is being tested with the backdrop of Sentry not having access to a team-up collection. Coming in a few months, we have the Thunderbolts movie. We have Bob in the movie, who's going to be, Sentry pre-power-up, I think, right? Reynolds. And so there's a very good possibility that if the Thunderbolts get a team-up collection, that Sentry's going to be in that team-up collection. I think at that point, people are going to sort of rediscover how good Sentry is for PvP, especially if you're fighting against enemies that don't have Agent Venom, even if they are fielding Knull. So you may have to make some tweaks to your teams. You may have to employ some less interesting or less strong supports like Shuri or Valkyrie, but ones that ultimately provide you with such a massive buff versus Knull that your Sentry can actually outperform him, punch up, and get you those clutch timeline battle victories. So that's my final take here. I have to sort of rule this a tie, essentially, or slightly in favor of Knull, but essentially only when you're able to combine him with the Juice Master, aka Agent Venom, the ultimate symbiote support. Otherwise, Sentry stands a very good chance of beating Knull, and I would call it nearly a 50-50 chance for the two of them. So to call them 1A and 1B rather than 1 and 2 is probably a more fair comparison. Anywho, hit me up in the comments down below. Let me know what you think. Thank you so much for watching. Smash the like button if you enjoyed the content, or the thumbs down if you hated it, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.